You know, one of the advantages of being a low-functioning alcoholic with a criminal record longer than Amber Heard's list of self-inflicted public humiliations is that you never have to worry about getting selected for jury duty. I mean, let's be honest here, there's not many people who relish the prospect of sitting through days or even weeks of tedious court proceedings, dry legal nitpicking and pointless formalities, only to get locked in a room with 11 other boring arseholes to rehash the whole thing again in the vain hopes of reaching a sensible verdict. And yeah, that's exactly the subject of 12 Angry Men, a classic 1957 courtroom drama directed by Sidney Lumet about a group of jurors who retire to consider the verdict of a murder trial. Yeah, it sounds like the title of some knockoff Quentin Tarantino movie or a porn flick, but in reality it's a tense, compelling, claustrophobic, tightly written, brilliantly directed and powerfully acted study into the dangers of collective decision making, the corrupting power of bigotry and prejudice, the importance of healthy skepticism and free thinking, and how sometimes all it really takes is one good man who refuses to back down to the mob. Imagine that in this day and age. The movie actually begins with a bit of an ending, in this case the murder trial of an 18-year-old kid accused of stabbing his father to death. The arguments have already been made and the facts of the trial have been laid out, and now it's time for the jury to consider its verdict. If they choose to convict him, then the kid will be sentenced to the electric chair, so they're not just deciding the fate of his freedom, they're deciding the fate of his entire life. At first the atmosphere is pretty laid back and jovial as they settle down to make their decision in a hot, cramped conference room. It seems like an open and shut case. There's a mountain of evidence against the kid, not to mention multiple witnesses who identified him as the killer. So they take a vote and everyone agrees that the only reasonable verdict is guilty. Well, everyone except juror number 8, who refuses to go along with the group, much to the confusion of the others. At first he objects on the pretext that a man's life's at stake, and the least they can do is give the guy a proper hearing first. All he really asks for is for each man to lay out his opinion and explain his decision. But as the movie progresses, he begins to cast doubt on various aspects of the case, from the evidence to the witness testimonies to the quality of his defense lawyers. He's not a passionate advocate convinced of his own position, but instead he's a reasonable, level-headed man asking reasonable questions about things that everyone else seems to take for granted. And little by little, his questions and objections begin to sow the seeds of doubt in the minds of his fellow jurors. Little by little, he picks holes in the case against the defendant, discrediting witnesses and rubbishing evidence. And as the doubts grow, so does the list of jurors deciding to change their verdicts and side with him. Tempers begin to fray as the temperature rises and the day drags on, the disagreements becoming increasingly vicious and personal. 12 Angry Men is a fascinating insight into everything from human psychology to collective decision-making, class and racial prejudice, the power of personal charisma, the American legal system, and the importance of standing up against mob decision-making. It's also a masterclass in sharp, consistent, cleverly implemented character developments. When you first meet the 12-man jury all at the same time, you're kind of lost in a sea of characters. You don't really know who anyone is or what they think about the situation, and at first they all seem pretty cohesive and polite to each other. And why wouldn't they be? They've just sat through a murder trial. It's important and exciting. They've been given a chance to punish a bad guy and right a wrong. But as the day drags on and the tension rises, divisions start to open up and the various personalities start to come out. The hardliner who wants to see justice done no matter what. The fastidious man convinced by the facts of the case. The idealistic immigrant who's enamored with the justice system. The bigot that was prejudiced against the kid from the start. The vacuous advertising man that's easily swayed by others. The kindly old man who spots details that other people missed. And the sports fanatic who doesn't care about the verdict and just wants to get it over with. Each of these men bring their own unique flaws, experiences, hang-ups, biases and perspectives to the table, and each of them proves to be significant in some way, either bringing forward an important insight that was overlooked in the trial, or exposing their own flawed thinking. The point is they're all different and they all perceive the case in different ways. Holy shit, who would have thought that people of the same race and gender could have vastly different worldviews, backgrounds, experiences and perspectives? Not anyone writing for Hollywood today, that's for fucking sure. One of the most powerful moments of the film comes when this dickhead goes off on some bigoted rant about the race of the defendant, and one by one, the other jurors turn their backs on him until he's left standing alone, coming face to face with his own racism. There are moments like this peppered throughout the film when men get pushed into exposing their true opinions bubbling away beneath the surface, and once they come out, once they've been said out loud, you can see the dawning realization on each of their faces. It's no easy thing to construct a story with 12 distinct characters shut away in a single room and still give each of them enough development and screen time that you know exactly who everyone is and how they think by the end, but 12 Angry Men does it absolutely perfectly. Movie studios today would kill to get writing this good. Jesus, it's hard to believe that an old black and white movie from the 1950s could be more intelligent, insightful, thought-provoking and socially conscious than pretty much any of the ham-fisted garbage that's been shat out in the past 10 years, but there it is. I guess they actually knew how to make good movies back then. Now, it's not often that I talk about cinematography in my reviews, because usually a film's visuals are pretty self-evident. You either like what you see or you don't, but in this case I'm going to make an exception because the tight focus on a single location in 12 Angry Men really shows up some of the interesting stuff that Lumet was doing here. There's lots of wide-angle shots in the early part of the movie, usually taken from a higher angle to include as many of the actors as possible. It gives a sense of space and detachment, like you're an outsider looking in on this thing. But as the film drags on, the angles get closer and lower until you're right in the thick of the action. You've been with these guys for over an hour now, you know who they are and you care about their points of view. In short, you're now one of them. And by the time the film reaches its climax, the camera is focused in tight on their faces, each man stripped of his pretenses and defences, at last coming face to face with his own conscience. It's awesome stuff that you don't really notice until you step back and analyse it for a while, and when you do, you realise how much thought and creative intelligence went into this movie. And well, that seems like an increasingly lost art nowadays. There's a tendency amongst us YouTube critics to start acting like wanky, pretentious film connoisseurs whenever we watch something made before 1975. And while I don't imagine I'll be reviewing too much French art house, Swedish abstract fantasy or Italian neo-realism anytime soon, I do have a healthy respect for the work of previous generations, and I think it's important to recognise and remember great filmmaking no matter what decade it comes from. And make no mistake, 12 Angry Men represents truly great filmmaking. It's a movie that's just as powerful and relevant now as it was more than half a century ago, and if you're interested in watching a tightly written, brilliantly directed and powerfully acted drama that'll keep you invested for 90 minutes and leave you thinking about it long after it's over, then I strongly recommend you give this one a shot. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.